Welcome to the Tracking Connections podcast, and thanks for listening.
We feature voices from around the world, sharing stories of working intentionally with deep nature connection in ways that transform lives, families, projects, and communities. I'm Sarah.
I'm Aiden.
And I'm Jon.
And we are your hosts from Living Connection First.
Hey everyone, it's Sarah here with Jon. We're going to talk today about the 10 stones of connective culture.
Yeah, this is Jon, and we were talking about what we would call core routines of people connection. And let's start with why that matters. You can probably remember times when you went to join up with a group of people and you had maybe some, unspoken or even maybe semi-conscious expectations that this is going to be really nice. These people seem nice. And when you got there, it felt really flat. Maybe no one saw you or acknowledged you entered the space. There was nobody who said hi or welcome, or maybe they were locked in a conversation with themselves and you kind of felt like you were an electron hovering around the outside of an atom waiting to join. And, in the end, you kind of felt, maybe more drained than anything. And, you couldn't wait to get out of the situation. Well, let's contrast that to times when you've gone to an event with other people, experience with other people where you left it feeling really energized, like, wow, this was great. These people are awesome, or like, I feel so good after being in that experience. That is actually something we have a lot more ability to facilitate than people might think. Over the last 40 something years, I have been researching, what helps people connect to nature, what helps people connect to each other as people, what helps people connect to themselves, and over the years, as we've kind of worked with different practical experiments, if you will, different groups trying different things in many places in the world, we came to understand that there was actually some very reliable routines that people could learn very quickly, that they could incorporate right after hearing about them, and actually the connective conversations between people go a lot better. Now, we may be focused on tracking connections with nature, with people, with self, but what we call the 10 stones, meaning like the foundation of something, right? These are the 10 foundation stones to help support connection in groups of people. And whereas we may be focused more on, how this can help people on the nature connection journey, this can help any setting. Like people who have learned about these 10 stones and used them, have applied them at work in project teams. I've seen musical combos, bands come together better because of it. It can apply in hosting a potluck at your house. It doesn't only have to do with nature connection. So we happen to use it in nature connection for this reason, which is, my mentor of 53 years, Tom Brown Jr., who passed away in August of 2024, taught me something, and I think it was about 1996. And he was showing me this symbolic diagram that his mentor grandfather, Stalking Wolf, had drawn in the sand, basically saying, notice these two arrows. They were two arrows in a sunwise direction, but they don't quite touch. And they form a circle, somewhat like the recycling symbol, right? You have these three arrows that kind of almost touch but don't. Well, this is two arrows that make a circle. And he said that the bottom half of this circle represents awareness, the experiences you have in nature, let's say. If we were talking about, a musical thing, it might be the experience you had playing your guitar. So whatever the experience is, you put on the bottom half. And then the top half, grandfather named ceremony. And Tom said, well, that's what grandfather said. You can't have only ceremony because it's only half a wheel, it won't roll. You can't only have experience, it's only half a wheel, it won't roll. You actually need them both in harmony. And he said, this is how I mentored you, Jon. I use this with you every day. And I started to think about that a lot. And I'm wondering, what does he mean? I don't remember doing ceremony with Tom every day. And I started to look at, just sort of stepping away from the idea of ceremony and looking at it, from a universal lens. What came to me was, oh, I understand. It was the way that he interacted with me. Like when I went out and had an experience, in nature, let's say I went out to my fishing pole, I came back, spent some time, sitting in this place that Tom had me sit every day, which, he called the sit area. I called the sit spot. But, just a place where I sat every day for an hour where I really got to know that place. When I got back home, he would have a conversation with me and ask me about my time and what I did. And he would have me, relive the experience in a lot of different ways. He would ask me lots of really interesting questions and kind of make me do a mental map. When I started to realize that way that he greeted me when I got back, the way he helped me really feel grateful for the experience itself, how he helped me kind of shake off the troubles of my school day or whatever was bothering me so I could be very present, how he listened to me, both with this unconditional silence listening, which was really, really potent for me when I was sharing, because I never felt pushback from him. And this spirit of allowance, like he may have wanted to ask me about something to do with fox tracks that I found that day, but maybe I wanted to talk about the great blue heron I saw while I was fishing. So he would let it go wherever I wanted it to go. There was this sense of, you do, Jon, and I'll just hold space. And, I may want to influence you in this direction to help you with this skill or to develop this awareness technique. But I also trust that you know who you are, and I'm going to allow you to do that. And then what that did over time was it really helped my gifts to surface. Like I really became in good relation with myself. I began to understand, who am I? What makes me unique? What makes me happy? What makes me passionate? What makes me curious? And it was all the result of this way that Tom hosted me when I returned, right? And you could say that he was offering like a very good way of communicating. He was offering words in a good way and he was listening well. And I was offering words in a good way because of his modeling. He was listening well, but then he would offer words and I would listen well because of his modeling. And he facilitated this conversation. It didn't usually last more than 15 or 20 minutes, sometimes a half hour. If we pulled out books and looked things up, it might go a little longer than that. And then, he revealed later in life, and in the last years of his life, that he followed a formula, which was essentially, he really trusted his intuition in these conversations. So if he's in that silent place listening to me, and he gets a flash in his mind of a story he should tell me, well, that would be the story he would tell me, and it would have a great impact on me. So he would also listen with this profound curiosity. He would seem to be more curious about my experience than I was about my own experience. And that actually really helped me to pull things out of the conversations and decipher things. And then there was always a moment of closure. Like I always knew when the conversation was coming to an end, and it always ended well. And I never felt like there was a loose end. It always felt complete. He usually left me with something to work on next, that was sort of based out of what we just did. And I start to realize, okay, that was the ceremony, and there was something about that way that he did these things, and over the years, as we began to do more and more group mentoring, group work, teaching art of mentoring, teaching communities, we began to understand that there was these universal principles that we could teach very quickly that would guide the interactions between human beings to go much better, where people would leave with that feeling of, oh my God, that was really fun. And, want to come back for more, right? Like this was a connective experience, an experience that left everyone feeling better. I wanted to say one other thing, which is that when people come to a meeting, and I hear this probably once a week from somebody, okay? And I'm in a lot of meetings during the week. All of these meetings are running with the 10 stones in the background. Like you call it the operating system or the conduct agreements of the culture of the organizations that I'm working with. I hear it almost every single meeting, at least once a week, okay? With different configurations of different people. And they say things like, wow, I actually feel better after this meeting than when I came. And in all my years of being in work meetings with different organizations, I can't tell you that there was a lot of meetings led by other organization cultures that left me feeling better at the end. I often felt drained, or I felt like, oh my God, like, oh, that meeting. But I never hear that from people. When the 10 stones is used as the operating system behind, this sort of the background culture, I mean, people actually report kind of healing effects from it. I'll just say that.
Well, one of the things that I really appreciate about the 10 stones is, well, one, that it's guidelines, right? Because we may really have a strong intention to be in good relationship with other people and not quite know how to navigate that. So having these kind of crystallized principles is really helpful as far as a set of guidelines that are organic and natural, that you can understand, first time around, you can understand at a particular level, but then it's a cycle of experiential learning where you can deepen into the stones just infinitely, right? There's so many layers of understanding and embodiment that you can just continue to return to and learn from through experience and through implementing. And with that said, again, it's simple enough and graspable and natural enough that you can start applying it. And we continuously get feedback from people saying, I just tried it at work, or I just tried it with this group that I'm bringing together, and I'm amazed at the change. I mean, we get these emails all the time, and it's so inspiring to hear that, because people are kind of shyly trying these principles and having these big results. And I think the other thing that I really love is that most of the stones, besides like maybe when we do intentional gratitude together or we do an intentional closing round, most of the stones are invisibly woven into an experience. So it's not a doing and it's not an imposition. It's really about a perspective that is being lifted up. And people don't necessarily understand, why do I feel so good after this meeting? But there is actually a reason, right? That they don't need to know exactly where you're coming from with your perspective or the way you questioned or the way that you conducted a meeting. It's in the pudding. They just know that it was good.
That's really cool. Yes, Sarah, it's in the pudding. And once people get familiar, like, what does it take 2 or 3 meetings or 2 or 3 cycles of this experience with people, it disappears. Like you're not even thinking about it anymore. It's just, oh yeah, this works really well. We all, Shore Charnot, grandmother Shore, from her Anishinaabeg lineage, she talks about the 5 needs of all human beings. It's a very old teaching, right? But it's a very obvious one too, and it perfectly correlates with interpersonal neurobiology and a polyvagal theory. Sense of safety that people need in a conversation, even in a conversation, right? But the 5 needs are simple. Everybody has a need to be seen. Everyone has a need to be heard. Everyone needs to feel like they are contributing. They need to know their contribution is valued, that they are valued, and that it causes them to know that they belong, right? When those 4 other needs are met, that belonging kind of emerges. It's like, oh, I like these people. I feel like I'm part of this little group here. This group feels like family to me. So these 10 stones really meet the 5 needs very nicely, and the first one is welcoming, welcoming or greeting, right? Because if you're coming together on a Zoom call, but you're not really welcoming, you're sort of greeting each other, right? But it's still the same thing. And greeting is really important. And it's in the greeting or the welcoming where that feeling of I'm being caught, I'm being seen, I'm being heard, oh, I'm valued, like that happens really quickly in the welcoming, or doesn't, right? Like reflecting back to what I said in the beginning, when you go to this thing where you are invited, but nobody even acknowledges you've arrived and they're all locked in a conversation and they don't even so much as look at you, that feels really bad, and it does not meet our basic needs, right? And the key to a good welcome or a good greeting is really being intentional and mindful yourself as the greeter or welcomer, and letting yourself remember that in order to really do a good job with welcoming or greeting somebody, the first thing that you need to do is become very present. You need to be in the moment yourself. And I like to say, welcome yourself to the moment first, right? It's so picked up on by people. I was washing dishes once because I invited people over for dinner and I really wanted to welcome them as they came through the door, but I just happened to be doing something in the kitchen that demanded my attention when someone showed up a little earlier than I expected. And they came in the door and I said welcome to them, but it was not coming at all from that place of presence. It was coming from that place where my mind was so busy and I was like worried about, the noodles overcooking or whatever it was. I transmitted my stress through the welcome and I could see them recoil from my welcome. I'm like, oh my God, that was so terrible. I quickly apologized. I said, I'm so sorry. I'm a little distracted at the moment. Please come in, give me a moment, and then I'm going to properly greet you. But there was this acknowledgement that I was not doing a good job as a welcomer. I saw it in the body language that I created in the way that I welcomed them. They could feel immediately that I wasn't being welcoming. So let's pay attention to that, right? So what does it mean to really welcome? I think it's as simple as, dropping into the moment, becoming present, really tuning in with your senses to where you are right now and just welcoming yourself to that moment. And then when that other person enters the Zoom room or enters your physical presence, really stay present when you greet them. And they'll feel that. I mean, people feel that. That's a really important thing. The second stone after welcoming or greeting is wiping off road dust. People come in the door or they show up at the meeting and, they show up in Zoom or on the phone call. I guarantee you they have something on their mind that's keeping them from being present. They just had a rough taxi ride to get to your place from the airport, or, they get stressed. They just got this email just before the meeting and they show up on Zoom and they are distracted. They're carrying something with them. And so, allowing people to wipe off the road dust simply means to give everybody a moment to just talk about what's going on and, intentionally express the things that they want to leave behind, that they're literally just kind of discharging a little bit. And it only takes a minute or two. People don't really have to take a long time with this, although sometimes they need to. Sometimes road dust can open up and it might be 20 minutes of that person sharing and everyone just listening and holding space. And, whoa, I feel so much better. Now I can be present, right? And we're like, well, that's what needed to happen in this meeting for sure. That we really value that because if people aren't present, the meeting isn't really happening on all levels. People are going through motions and going through agendas and writing things down, where they're going through the motions in these social settings, at these, events or parties or whatever. But it feels like I can't wait. I keep looking at my watch. I can't wait to go home. So if you help people wipe off the road dust, and really truly welcome that, and they get to tell that story of the taxi ride or the email or whatever, they'll relax and suddenly they'll feel lighter and they'll be much more present and much more able to be present for whatever the gathering purpose is. The third one is, we like to say gratitude. There's so much evidence out there now about how finding something to be grateful for, finding something uplifting to lift up and celebrate. I just saw the coolest sunset on my way here, or wow, I am just so thankful for the sun, dropping behind the trees and the air cooling off because it was such a hot day, but I'm so thankful for the coolness of this evening breeze. But really, just one little thing that you sincerely feel gratitude about will, when everyone has offered that, and often we'll do this, we'll just take turns. People might say, I'll pass it to Aiden, and then Aiden will say, well, I'll pass it to Sarah. It doesn't have to be a formal thing like a talking stick or, you go first, you go second. Although I do see sometimes in Zoom conversations, people will write the speaking order in the chat. So if everyone knows in advance who's going when, whatever facilitates ease between people, let each person have a greeting, greet everybody else, wipe off a little road dust, and give a little gratitude. And, those are the first three stones. And that kind of marks the beginning of the gathering or the meeting, right? Or the conversation.
And I really appreciate how those three stones, right? It is all about becoming present, right? I arrive, I am welcomed, I am present here. The person, who's greeting me is also present. And then we're letting go of the static, right? Letting go of the road dust, the things that are distracting. That's bringing us even more present. And then bringing in gratitude, right? That's like presencing of kind of our higher self, right? Or truer, more genuine self, right? Presencing, my heart and my true mind here. And then really setting the platform, right, for the middle stones, which are maybe the more subtle nuances of being in relationship with each other.
Yeah, those are the ones that are more in the pudding than any of the others, right? They're part of the atmosphere. They don't appear as active things to do, whereas, greeting, wiping off road dust, gratitude, these are three things that you could actually, write down on a piece of paper and do them in order, right? Whereas this next one, which is unconditional listening, is more about the intentionality, the mindful way that we show up as participants in the conversation, right? And unconditional listening is simply that. We're listening without placing any conditions on the other. We are not trying to fix anything. We're not trying to give advice. We're certainly not interrupting. We're just listening. And the quieter we can become inside, the more the other feels listened to. And then number 5 is that culture of allowance I spoke about earlier, how, Tom just allowed me to talk about what I wanted to talk about in that lovely container he caught me in each evening, that top half of the yarrow. He wants me to talk about the fox tracks, but I want to talk about fishing, right? Sometimes we're together in this meeting to talk about something and someone goes off on a tangent about galaxies or seeing the Andromeda galaxy and then having to talk for 5 minutes about all these different stars and their variability of brightness, and everyone's in the meeting kind of like, huh. Wow. And yet, that person feels so good after that because what they're doing is they're sharing what they love, and it's coming out and it's kind of lifting everybody, oh, he really likes those things. And it makes you think about yourself for a minute, like, wow, what do I really like? And is this a safe place to, to riff a little bit here and there? And yeah, it is. It all depends on your facilitation, right? And what you have to get done in the time frame that you have. But we'll get to that one too. So we have unconditional listening, number 4, and number 5, culture of allowance, which, as I said earlier in my introduction to what Tom used to do with me as a boy, it allowed me to be me. I am doing me. And the more I do it, and the more I trust these conversations with Tom, he's the one person who's allowing my own sense of self to be amplified, strengthening my own sense of self. Over time, what that does is it lifts up my gifts, my passions, the things that I love, right? So we call the 6th one lifting up the gifts in others and ourselves. So that's just an intention, right? It's like, let's watch for that moment when that person gets really excited about talking about stars and galaxies. Let's watch for that moment when that person automatically goes to talking about a metaphor that involves soccer or football. Like people begin to reveal themselves over time. You start to notice that person who's in conversation regularly, who's just really good at remembering everything that happened in the last meeting. And that person always in the beginning of the meeting offers to reflect back on what happened last time and does it with such accuracy. It's just like, oh, wow, you have a gift for that. We start to see that and we lift it up intentionally, right? So that's what we mean. We just are holding the intention to watch each other to see when that person's light is shining, so to speak, because they may not even be aware their light is shining.
I just really appreciate that as a core routine of people connection. Like, what better intention really can you have, right? To seek the gift in another person as a core routine in every conversation. What is the gift, right? That unconditional listening, allowing them to be just exactly who they are, and then really listening and tuning in for the gift. Like, to have that as the lead for connection with other people just feels so incredibly powerful. Why would we look for anything else?
Nicely said. Yeah, that makes me feel uplifted, even just hearing you say that. The 7th one is kind of a deepening of unconditional listening and offers these 3 simple elements. In the 7th one, we call it relational modeling, peace tending and relational modeling. And what you're doing is you are reflecting on your own mental state, emotional state, spiritual state. How are you feeling, basically, right? And the first thing you want to do is have the intention that, well, when I'm in a conversation like this, I'm going to be in the best state of peace that I can find within myself. What does my best sort of homeostasis feel like, right? And I'm also going to recognize and be intentional about when I lose that state of personal peace, that I can actually call attention to that. Like, okay, I'm kind of losing my ability to listen, friends, because I got a little triggered back there. It's not that nobody said anything wrong, and it just sort of hit me in a certain way. I'm feeling a little bit out of my center. I'm a little knocked off my center. I don't have that peace inside. So can we just take maybe a 5-minute bio break or something? I'll just go step outside, and I'm going to get myself back into a state of regulation, so to speak, right? I'm going to just go out, take a deep breath. Well, some people might do a little stretch. Somebody might just take a quick walk. Somebody might go over in the corner and shake their arms. People just need a little reset sometimes, right? They get a little overloaded. So we track ourselves to make sure we're holding that peace. And then the second principle of that one is, okay, I'm going to commit myself to do my best to hold that peace when I'm speaking to you all. And I'm going to hold that peace when you're speaking to me as best I can, right? So that second one is just interpersonal peace, how we communicate with each other intentionally, holding that peaceful state. And then the third one is I'm going to look for that point in the conversation where it feels like we've come into harmony. There's like this beautiful feeling that emerges, and it's like the group mind becomes really strong and the creativity starts to really rise. And I think that's the moment when everyone starts to feel better. Like, I think it's like, okay, we've all relaxed into this. Our needs have been met. We feel really safe with this group of people. We feel really seen and heard, valued and understood. All of a sudden, everyone relaxes and our best comes out and our best merges with everyone else's. And this is like group harmony or group peace, so that's the third one. So there's personal peace, interpersonal peace, and then the group peace or the group unity that emerges. And, this is a beautiful teaching that was really emphasized by the late Jake Swamp and his wife, Judy, from the Tree of Peace Society, Akwesasne Mohawk people from the Akwesasne Reservation, Haudenosaunee culture. They worked with our program and our elders for about 10 years, and we really worked on understanding those three principles. So that seventh one is just about mindfulness, about how we approach the conversation. I'm going to come from peace. I'm going to choose good words coming from a place of peace when I speak to you. I'm going to listen from peace, and then I'm going to really look for that unity to emerge and really hold space for that good mind to come over all of us, right? It's a really, really sweet way to work together. And the eighth one, I credit Brian Knittel for this, who I've been working with for decades, and he's one of the elders in our councils. And he said to me, Jon, you did those 512 project recordings of the 64 cultural elements. I hate to tell you this, but there's a 65th cultural element. I said, well, Brian, I'm not going back and re-recording and adding it. What is it? He says, it's actually really that all of your 64 cultural elements reflect on cultures that are well established, where connection is a core routine for everyone. But what's true, and he runs a lot of men's circles. He's been working with the Mankind Project for a long time. And he basically said a lot of modern people didn't grow up with good connective protocols, and they don't even know how to show up in a container like this. And maybe the first time that they feel a bunch of people are listening, no one's ever listened to them before, right? So all of a sudden they start taking up the whole time and they just talk for 45 minutes without a break. So sometimes we need light facilitation. So he says the number 65 is facilitation as a cultural element, which is totally true. And the beautiful thing, when you're operating with the 10 stones as an agreement that everyone talks about beforehand, and then they're like, let's try this. Well, someone can say, hey, I'll be the timekeeper. There's 5 of us here. We only have an hour, so I'll make sure we all get equal time. And that's pretty much all you're facilitating for. Sarah, you have a lovely way of saying this to our villagers in the Living Connection First Village just before a breakout. I'd love for you to pretend we're about to go in a breakout, and you just lay out that little quick facilitation thing that you do.
So while you're in breakouts, make sure everyone has about the same amount of time. And when one person is sharing, allow them to share without interjection or interruption. And then when they're complete, share reflections if they're welcome. And if you find someone is over talking, just gently reel them in. You can use a hand gesture or a heart emoji, or unmute yourself and just gently say their name and reflect back to them that it may be time for reflections for them, and to pass it along, because truly it is normal for people to overspeak. And if you are the one that's overspoken, please don't feel shy or bad about that. Just lovingly receive the feedback, and understand that this is normal, and there is time that's involved here.
I've heard that so many times, people, and she does it every time, and I just get this big smile on my face, and so many of the villagers get that big smile and that knowing smile, and that's it. That's as simple as the facilitation can be, right? It often involves something along the lines of, hey, we're going to have 25 minutes for this breakout. So there's going to be 3 people in the breakout. So do the math. You can each do around 5 minutes each, and but please, be mindful of that. So that's what we mean by facilitation as a cultural element. It can be that simple.
And I think it's meeting that place of culture of allowance. That yes, we allow you to speak as you wish, and and there are boundaries, gentle boundaries, and your compadres there in the breakout with you are allowed to speak, right? Like, allowance has a lot of different meanings. Sometimes that one can get tricky for people, and frustrated, and feel like, oh, I have to, kind of sit back and feel like I just have to allow this person to continue speaking. So we're trying to normalize that it's okay if you overspoke, and it's okay to be, reminded that it's time to pass on. So it's just all comfortable, and it's just all part of the culture.
Yeah, well said. The one thing that Brian always says about this is that it's very important to lift up all voices, especially the quiet voice, because there are people who come from family cultures where the only way that you get in a word in edgewise is by dominating the conversation, right? And that's normal for that person. But then there's other people who come from family dynamics that they grew up with where they just have to be quiet, right? And they never interrupt and they never talk. So if you get those 2 people together, then one person's going to talk the whole time and the other person's never going to say a word. So the goal of facilitation is to make sure that all voices are heard, and you're combing for the quiet voice, is the way Brian likes to say it. And I love that, because that quiet voice person will start to rise, and they'll start to say some things that are really beautiful and brilliant, when they find their voice and they get comfortable. And that person who was the dominant talker will realize and self-check out loud. They'll say, yeah, I realize I'm a long talker, and I need to really check myself and be careful here. So don't ask me that question right now, so they'll become self-aware right in front of each other. We often call this, failing in front of each other or learning in front of each other. And we're learning about how to be in good connective conversation. So it doesn't have to be perfect. That's the other thing. So that brings us to stone number 9, which I emphasized a little bit in my story sharing about Tom, where I told you he really trusts his intuition, and he goes into that quiet mind, that what he called the sacred silence, when he's listening to another person, and he sees what pops up in his mind when the other person is talking. He says, oh, I just had the urge to tell this story, or I got really curious about this part of your story. So you're trusting your curiosity as the listener, and you're trusting what comes into your intuition. And these are really, really powerful things over time as you develop. If you get to be in a container of conversation like this with someone you're mentoring or, working with on an ongoing basis, it'll really surprise you how powerful that is. It seems very simple, but when we learn to trust silence inside ourselves, and we're holding space in a conversation using these 10 stones, and another person is speaking, and you get this flash in your mind's eye. And when it's your turn to speak, and hey, I earlier, let's just say, Sally, when you spoke earlier, I had this picture come to my mind, and I'd like to share a little story if that's okay with you. Oh, yeah, yeah. And then you share that story, and the next thing you know, Sally's got tears coming down her cheeks, and she's just like body nodding. And it's like, what just happened? I don't even know. Right. But that story really helped Sally have a breakthrough. But you had no idea you were going to do that. You didn't know she needed the breakthrough. You certainly wouldn't have been able to reason out, even what story to tell. It simply came from the silence of your being and your intuition, right? So Tom called that inner vision, but he trusted that inner vision and that childlike curiosity as a listener. And that's the ninth stone. We call it compassionate curiosity and trusting intuition. And the 10th one is the easiest one, but it's one that people often forget. And it's like when the conversation ends, it's actually really good to acknowledge that the conversation has come to completion. Have you ever left a conversation where it wasn't tied up and there was like this feeling of loose end and you felt like you left yourself back there and you're like, wow, that's weird. Did we just finish talking? Like all we're basically saying is just like we had a boundary in the beginning that acknowledged the opening, with greetings and road dust and gratitude. Now you have a boundary on the other end that contains that conversation. So we know the meeting is coming to an end. There's lots of different ways that people do this. One really simple way to do it is for each person in that conversation, if it's a small group, to basically have a quick, one sentence reflection or a gratitude about what they got from the meeting, just like that. And then when it comes back to the facilitator, it's like, well, thanks everybody. Let's all go off and bring good things to our friends or whatever. So just some formal way of saying we're done, right? So everyone can feel comfortable.
Just wanted to reflect on number 9, the compassionate curiosity and inner vision, and how that one emerges so organically over time. Like that's definitely not something that you do head on, right? You don't say, I'm going to be compassionately curious and I'm going to listen to my inner vision, right? It's like getting to that place through the unconditional listening, through the full presence, through the really tuning into gifts and the intention for holding peace and supporting, a loving atmosphere. That intuitive mind emerges. Really, these stones are allowing that part of ourselves to become present and come to the forefront. So, in contrast to gratitude, where we're kind of starting our engines like, okay, what am I grateful for? The gratitude could be on the surface, but other times, we're really looking for, okay, where's my sense of gratitude? And finding our center around that. In contrast to the intuition emerging, it kind of comes, right? Like in the moment, like you said, like a flash or a curiosity, like a true curiosity. And sometimes you don't even know where that curiosity comes from versus, kind of looking for, oh, what am I supposed to say? Right. It's that difference of, I don't know how to meet this person and trying to figure it out cognitively or with our intellect. It's relaxing into what can often be a discomfort of not trying to fix or resolve or solve or trying to meet a person, but really just being present. And so it's a pretty cool one to return to, again, cyclically come back to, okay, exactly does this mean to me in my relationships?
Yeah, that's the 10 stones in a nutshell. Just a quick review, welcoming or greeting is number 1, and wiping off road dust is number 2. Number 3 is offering gratitude. Number 4, unconditional listening. 5, culture of allowance. 6, lifting up the gifts of others and ourselves. 7, coming from that peaceful place, looking for interpersonal peace, finding that group peace, that moment of unity. 8, facilitation as a cultural element, combing for the quietest voice. 9, that listening deeply to your own curiosity and intuition. As Sarah said, it's a skill that gets deeper over time. And 10, just having a good closure, where everyone acknowledges and knows that the container is now going to be open, And boy, it kind of doesn't matter what activity you put into that part of the people connection aspect of, a workshop or a potluck or getting together to play music with friends, or a storytelling session or a mentoring relationship or a project team. I've only seen this bring out the best in everyone, and I've seen the performance of those groups or that conversation go to a very high level when people got used to the cultural approach, the protocol approach of the 10 stone.
And we like to suggest starting with what we call the cornerstones of connection, which are those first 3 stones and the last stone. So the first 3 being welcoming, road dust, story of the day, and gratitude. And then the final reflections at the end, wrapping the bundle. because it creates a container. And even just setting those intentions out front, right, that can shift the whole vibe of a gathering or a meeting. And then doing that final reflection at the end gives that feeling of we were all present together, an acknowledgement, right, and a feeling of, okay, we did a thing, and now we're being released. It kind of reminds us that we were together with an intention, and now we're doing something else. So again, we've had feedback from people that even just using those 4 stones, the first 3 and the final stone, creates a container that is tangible and effective and opens people in a way that's really surprising.
Yeah. So think about how you might do something with the 10 stones. And the one thing we always let people know is that, it's really important to invite people to consider it first, and maybe they listen to this podcast, and then come together and have a conversation. Hey, do we want to do this? Right. And, if there's 3 people in the conversation, come together and figure out your version of it. Right. Because every group ends up evolving their own sort of personal twist on it, so to speak. Right. A style emerges depending on who is doing this together. So it's important to get agreement. And, if people are like, well, I'm not so sure, this sounds kind of whatever, then do something simple like, well, let's try it like for 3 meetings. And at the end of the 3rd meeting, let's evaluate and see, do we want to continue or do we want to make some changes? Because that way it's not such a big risk. But I think you have to remember that just because you found it really helpful, if you've experienced it, doesn't mean that, if you just go in and just try to do it with people who have no idea what you're doing, that it's going to go well. The important thing is that everybody comes to agreement on it beforehand. And then, yeah, it should go well. And if it doesn't go well, one of the people who I've been working with for 14 years, who's very experienced in this, will say, sometimes if it's not going well, it's because we left out something or we forgot to, the intention of this particular way of doing things. And maybe we have to reorient ourselves, so there's time to stop and debrief. How is the process going? And, oh yeah, that's right. I remember in the beginning, we were supposed to facilitate for the quietest voice. We weren't doing that. Oh, right. Because her feelings were hurt because she kept getting talked over. Oh yeah, right. So you'll discover these things by just pausing and reflecting on how is our process going, debriefing it a little bit, and then reorienting again, revisiting. And we'll make that easy for you. On the show notes, we'll put a little PDF of the 10 stones and, summarized for you that you can, download and have a look at for yourself and share with other people.
You might also check out the podcast with Martha, Patrick, and Susu, who had used the 10 stones and some H-Shields designed to run a weekend event and had really, really good results with it.
Oh, yeah. That's a great story. A great set of stories. I want to acknowledge and give gratitude to all the people who contributed to this, right? Because, I mentioned Jake and Judy Swamp and also Mike McDonald from the Tree of Peace Society, who contributed to this between 1990 and the year 2000. We spent 10 years with them in post consulting. And also Ingwe, the elder that helped start my first project in 1983, who lived to be 92 and passed away in 2005. He was very much about conducting the youth programs and the adult programs we were running for kids in nature according to this kind of formula. He was very much natural in this. And I will point also to Tom Brown for doing this for me from the age of 10 until he passed away in 2024, August. And then all the people who came together and test drove it, right? Like there's all these people who worked with it at artimentary communities all over the place. And then right after the pandemic, or actually during the pandemic, we realized we had to move everything to Zoom. And we thought, what are the most important cultural elements to run effective connective Zoom meetings? And, this is where the 10 stones emerged from. And we worked with multiple communities. We, test drove it for a bit on Zoom, and we're like, yeah, this is working beautifully. So yeah, thanks to the elders at the Tractor School and the elders that work with Living Connection First for helping refine this and put it into practice in different community settings so that we would have something useful to share with all of you. And thanks to Aiden for editing podcasts and helping us keep the Tracking Connections podcast ball rolling.
Yeah, just sharing that gratitude for all the minds that went into creating this as a set of guidelines, right? As a guideline, and just for the universality of it, and also just the awareness that it is also a living document, right? I think it doesn't ever want to be static. It always wants to be informing itself. And I love that. I love just asking the question, what are the core routines of people connection? How can we do this in a really good way? So yeah, thanks everyone for listening.
Yes, thank you so much. And we'll catch you next time. Find us at livingconnectionfirst.net, where we practice with the 10 stones with people from all over the world.
Thanks for listening to Tracking Connections. You can find everything related to the podcast and our current offerings at trackingconnections.net. We'll see you next time.